what our aim is eventually would be to take LED technology and be able to integrate that into existing conventional fixtures. So if you have a lighting package, if you're a gaffer or a DP, you've invested in your own equipment. 10 years from now, when LEDs are prominent and tungsten is kind of frowned upon as being ungreen and wasteful, we would take those instruments and we would integrate the LED systems into those instruments, pull the tungsten component out, and replace it with LED technology and restore that fixture. Because what we want ultimately with these LEDs is to emulate the same effect we get with a Fresnel and a tungsten source, which is a single point source of light. Okay. One of the problems with the LEDs that you're seeing, and this one in particular doesn't necessarily share that problem because of the way we're diffusing it. Okay, I tell my guys this is the finger test. When I'm on the set and I'm lighting somebody, I use the finger test. Okay, I look at several things when I do this. I'm looking at my key light direction. I'm looking at the contrast I'm generating from my key light. Okay, and I'm looking at relative shadow issues or problems that I might have with a mixture of sources. Okay, particularly on a set. When you start building in a lot of lighting, you're building in environmental lighting, you're building up the ambience, you're lighting the set, you're lighting the talent, and you have multiple points of key. She might sit here, she might stand up and walk over here. So I want to know what's happening. Am I getting just what I want in this position? If you notice, I'm striking one relatively soft, low contrast shadow in my palm from 1200 LEDs. One source. It's kind of what Gail's talking about, getting one source on the moon with xenons in a mirror. This is the issue. There's a lot of the LEDs that are on the market, particularly the ones that don't have an aggressive diffuser like this one has. When I do the finger test over here, I see 6 or 8 or 9 shadows of my finger here on my hand.
That tends to look really ugly because you get 6 or 7 nude shadows, and when you look at someone closely, it really does look ugly. And so the single source idea is incredibly important for lighting integrity, and especially for faces. It's really ugly when you get multiple shadows on a face.
Absolutely,
So
and not only that, but you have a, pardon me?
It's the fusion that solves that?
Well, mostly, but it's also controlling the point source behind the diffusion. Even if you heavily diffuse a Mole Richardson limelight, for instance, you still may see a multiple shadow building up on your finger test. That's because the point sources are so striking against the diffusion. You have to really diffuse it. Usually, the best solution is to indirectly bounce and then diffuse to get all of that to work as one light source. What we're trying to create when we have a light like this is we want things that I call them terminators. In other words, I look at shadows and I see where does the highlight start and where does it terminate into shadow, and how thick is the shadow and how much contrast does the shadow have. Okay, shadows that's our shape, that's our stock and trade. So if I have a source that's fighting me constantly, in other words, if I'm trying to create a predominant shape with a nice gentle contrast and fall off from her right to her left, and I have a multiple point source instrument here, it's going to fight me as I'm coming around. It's going to create a parallax that's going to fight me all the time with my shape. Now it's diffused, and the diffuser is doing the job it's supposed to do. It's helping me with a highlight, and it's radiating off. It's gradiating off into a nice contrast and nice shadow. And to me, that's the most important vital aspect of the unit. I don't think there's a lot of guys out there that are really affecting the light of hard direct lighting anymore. The Fresnels were originally designed for that intent, hard direct lighting. But our styles have changed so much in filmmaking. Our capture devices are so sensitive. If we use a lot of aggressive hard lighting now, we'd end up with a muddled result, which would really, it wouldn't help the story, and it wouldn't help us as artists to sort of, put our best foot forward and create drama with our lighting. So to me, this was the most important fixture to start with, is get a really nice, good, soft source that has a nearly perfect CRI. If I put my colorimeter to this, my colorimeter can tell me a number of different things. It tells me my difference between daylight and tungsten. It tells me my adjustments to go one way or the other. And it'll also tell me where I'm at with my green levels in my source. And this light, on its worst settings, might generate maybe a 0.1 on my colorimeter, which it's kind of an arbitrary scale. It has to do with my redshift values, but basically that's less than a 16 minus green as far as the correction gel that we would have to use to restore that -1 green component to 0. In other words, we don't make a gel thin enough to detect that little amount of green and correct it. So this is a virtually undetectable level of green in this light. Okay, and in most applications, I get a 0 out of my cone.
Green is a very, very difficult color to deal with because then if you have other light sources, if you correct out the green in your post, the other light source or other objects become magenta, and
Yeah,
that green
absolutely.
magenta split is one of the ugliest things to have to deal with in color correction later. So it's very important to pay attention to that to avoid green in your light sources, unless of course it's what we were talking about, like moonlight or sodium vapor, mercury vapor light coming in through a window. So very important point.
So that's why if you light the set nicely with tungsten and you get everything nicely keyed in, you have a nice rich stop, you've calculated your contrast between your highlight and your shadow, you're getting a good read in the shadows, that's going to give you a nice representative color balance, and you bring in a key light that has a green component. Even with as effective and sophisticated as the power windows are these days in a DI suite, if you fix the key result that has a green component, you will affect everything else.
What's the material that you use for diffuser? Is it like I saw that the other unit you had.
It's like a heavy milky plexi, but it's not. It doesn't have a shiny surface. It has a little
It's kind of matte.
a little tooth to it, like a bead blasted matte, and that helps further the diffusion effect.
Are there different, that looks like it has barn doors on it. I mean, do you have like spotlight?
At the moment, this is a soft source. If we were working with this on set, we would call it the big softy. Okay. In other words, I don't want to be able to spot this in and create more contrast. I want this to have a much softer, lower contrast feel to it. It's enough to give me shape and form in the lighting, and give me enough contrast in the sense that I can see a definite difference between the high side and the low side of my talent. Okay, but I don't want to create a heavy contrast. I do that with backlight and with ambience. So what I wanted to do is make sure that we had a really good soft source first, because nobody else right now in the market has perfected a true soft source that does the work that this one does. Now that we've got this tackled, now I'm going to have to go back and talk to engineers and start giving me contrast, start giving me focus. That's really hard because we have to use multiple LEDs to do that, so we have convergence issues, okay, to create a single point source, and then we have output issues to give us the same contrast and light levels against our key source that will create, for instance, a hard edge. So we have a lot of work to do when we go back to the lab to get those types of things perfected. There's a few units out that are starting to boast visibility, but what I'm finding is, for one reason or another, there's one aspect or there's something about the unit that's falling short and it's not meeting up with all of the expectations that we have. So for a while, I think when you go with contrasty light fixtures, you're gonna suffer some kind of compromise. There's only one company out there that I can think of right now that has produced an effective punchy LED, and that's the LEDZ company. They've tackled the output, they've tackled the CRI, they've got beautifully color balanced LEDs. They're very punchy, the output is very intense. But at close range, it doesn't pass my finger test because we have multiple LEDs. So we have to sort of work that out. Right now we're experimenting with diffusions, attachable diffusion panels, chimeras, and things of that nature to sort of soften that up and blend the multiple LEDs into one source. But if you want that punch, if you really want the push, those lights right now are working best as environmentals and as edge lighting.
What about using something like this on a green screen?
I think it would be very effective on a green screen. Your primary consideration with a green screen is creating a nice flat feel so that you don't have any ghosting when you pull your mattes.
Do you make different size panels, or they?
At the moment we have two. I have the 2x2, which I would consider my big key light. I have a 1x2, which has the same number of LEDs, but it's in a smaller diffuser panel. So it develops a little bit more contrast, a little bit more push. If you were talking about an interview situation or on set at close range, if you're using a 2x2 as your soft key source, you could easily get away with a 1x2 as an edge light or a cheeker. or a background light. I don't know if you can see it here. Got a little light on it. This is the 1x2. And it uses the same number of LEDs, like I said, but it's through a smaller diffusion panel. And Gail mentioned something earlier which is fairly relevant to this fixture, and that's the inverse square law. The bigger your diffuser gets with the same number of LEDs, the lower contrast the output in the light. So I might develop almost about a quarter of a stop more intensity out of this unit at the same distance from my subject because of the smaller diffuser.